Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one-planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting, and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections, and actions. Together, we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy, and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators Program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators Program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Today in Sense Making in a Changing World, I'm thrilled to welcome Rosemary Morrow, the teacher of permaculture teachers around the world, a highly respected elder and author of the permaculture classics, Earth User's Guide to Permaculture and the accompanying Teacher's Guide, as well as Permaculture Teaching Matters. Rosemary does what you could call permaculture service work, offering permaculture education in some of the most challenging regions of the world, because it's here that she feels it's needed most. She's worked in places such as Cambodia, Timor, Kashmir, Uganda, Afghanistan, the Middle East. She only goes too by invitation. So Rosemary spends much of her time in the 2/3 world, the majority world, the edgy places of society, where permaculture is so valued for surviving and thriving with little. Rowe was awarded the 2017 Advancing Global Australia Agriculture Award. In our conversation, Rowe and I explore permaculture education. She sees its potential is profound and its application universal. Now, more than ever, she says, we need to be teaching permaculture everywhere. And she encourages us to explore how to keep our permaculture thinking alive as we face the ever-changing world with cascading disasters like fire, COVID, climate change, economic collapse. I really hope that you enjoy this conversation, this wide-ranging conversation with Rosemary Morrow as much as I did. Thanks for joining me today, Ro. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on this show. So for those of you who haven't heard about Ro's work before, Ro is an author. She's a permaculture designer, permaculture teacher, advocate for relocalization, and well known in the permaculture movement, I suppose, as someone who is working on the edges, working with displaced people, working with refugees, and just being ever so pragmatic and positive all the time. And some of your books that I just have to bring these out to, because it may not be the current issue, and I know you're doing something interesting with this now, but this book, that the Earth User's Guide to Teaching Permaculture, was a really important book. I think I had the early edition. This is the one that I'd been handing around to my students, but your very first one, I know when I was first starting out, learning how to be a permaculture teacher, your approach was what really kind of grounded it and made it feel possible for me. So thank you for the work you've done in that. And I know since then you've done a whole lot of other work as well, like you put, what's it called? The Permaculture Teaching Matters. There's a really clear guide about how to teach permaculture. It's available online for free that people can download. So do you know what the website is for that offhand? Or I can definitely put it down below in the show notes anyway.
It is the Blue Mountains Permaculture Institute.
Yep.
bmpi.com.au, Blue Mountains Permaculture Institute. I think in writing Morag, I'm writing not for myself. I am writing to fill a gap. So when I started to teach after I finished my course in 86, I realised that it was going to be really difficult for people to get started, that the course was pretty unwieldy and all over the place. And how could you get a flow of continuity that teachers could start and then deviate from it according to their experience and understanding and wherever they were, but to get started. So I wrote the first book, Earth User's Guide to Permaculture, for general readers. And then that teacher's book you just put up was to provide the technical information for a teacher. So, if you're going to teach water, well, here are the stages and the way to go through it. Then I expect teachers to put it aside and probably never look at it again once they've written their own course, and that's fine. And the third one, Teaching Permaculture Matters, which I've just reviewed, is how to teach teachers. Because I think the next thing is to teach teachers well so they don't spend years trying to get their courses and their methods and their content and their technique together. So teaching the teachers is based on learner-centred. So all the time I think, well, where is the gap? Where is the gap? As I'm writing, I'm thinking, will this be useful to someone? Will it make sense to someone? Can they use it? Is there a sequencing and something that's comfortable? I come from a slightly scientific, or not scientific, science-oriented background. I've worked with the humanities, but my sense of urgency about the natural environment is so pressing and so strong that I keep saying, look, work with the earth and discover yourself as you do it. But if we keep waiting for us all to sit down and become perfect, it's not going to happen. So engage with others, and it will be a real growth thing for you. It's
yes,
quite
absolutely.
wonderful. Yeah.
So the thing about being teachers, like your key focus all the time has been, well, amongst many things, has been about teaching the teachers.
I'm profoundly interested in how people learn, because if you're going to be a teacher, do you really just want to spend hours preparing a course and putting it down, and fewer than 5% take away or remember? In refugee camps, everyone wants to learn English and computers. At the end of a 3-month course, there's 3 people sitting there. They wanted to learn what happened. So I think the only way to think about teaching is, are people learning? Is this accessible? And I think the ultimate test is take a difficult concept and put it in a way that everyone can follow. It doesn't matter whether people are literate or not. You will need special methods to do it. You can't just talk and have people understand. You'll need all sorts of creative, innovative ways to do it. But it just is such a waste to teach and not have people learn.
So can we take a step back then a little bit and say, so what is that actually drew you to permaculture in the first instance, and why is it that you've thrown, so much energy in your life to teaching people permaculture and how to teach permaculture? What is it about the permaculture itself that you find so useful and practical, and particularly in those communities that you've just been talking about?
A couple of things. When I first did my course, I realised it could flow in such a way that you're actually building the knowledge all the time. I look at it now as a tree, you're helping new leaves grow rather than use a building metaphor. And I also realised you could go deeper. If you taught the first place about sector analysis, precipitation, radiation, wind, that's essentially what it is, as well as what runs on and off in the insects and the shade. But essentially, it's those major elements of climate. When you come to climate, you've covered a lot of it, and you're going a bit deeper and a bit broader. When you come to forests and you're looking at functions of forests, the students are with you. And they end up going, wow, so a forest does all that. But you don't want to stop in the middle of forests and say photosynthesis is and radiation is. You want to be using your vocabulary and knowledge. So you're introducing quite small and getting them to work with the ideas themselves. And then by the time you get to the difficult stuff, you just say.
So it's interesting, isn't it, that why I came to permaculture in a lot of ways is from my background in systems thinking and design, and not finding a way for it to be very tangible or understandable, that permaculture somehow, in just what you were saying then, that this understanding of systems can come quite simply, regardless of your educational background, regardless of your context. You can begin to understand systems and how you can engage with them and how you can begin to transform them.
Yeah, you can keep layering and layering, connecting and connecting. The people who find us most difficult are sometimes engineers. And I remember having an engineer in a class, and he said, we've done radiation in regard to climate or heat or, in regard to storage and black body. Now we're doing it about soils. And I'd say, yeah. And then he said, too many variables. Can't we hold everything constant? Which was a sort of refuting of systems processes where everything is moving together, really. It's all those variables are happening, and we're looking at them, first of all, one by one, and then in the next stage, it's 2, then 3, then 4, all being thrown in, so that the students think they knew before they did the course. I think that's the ideal if you can get it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah. So you were talking the other day when we were chatting about that you're starting to, you're doing some work on updating some of your material and adding in a couple of extra sections. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, because it sounded fascinating what the edge that you're exploring there?
So the last couple of years have told me how middle class and Western permaculture is. People sitting around saying, I want 5 acres in the country, or I think I'm going to start a community or a meditation centre, and I want to provide something. That's not relevant to probably 2/3 of the world, huge numbers. And then we know that nearly 80% will be living in cities in very, very difficult conditions in the future. So I asked myself a couple of years ago, what is permaculture to say to not just wonderful cities like Milan, where people have lived for centuries and they've worked out their spaces and their cultural life and they can easily get to the country. What about cities of 18 million, Mexico City, Delhi? What about cities that have got very crowded high-rise and they've also got enormously crowded flat settlements, informal settlements? Who's accounting for those in permaculture? I don't know that anyone is. So I started to look at it partly through the eyes of refugee camps and what people could learn and do, and ended up with a real body of tiny taking the permaculture principles, but tiny strategies and techniques that would apply to a range of circumstances. And of course, the students, they can see the application they've done in my camp and they've run with it. And it has worked and it's been very, very effective. And I've been staggered.
I was going to ask you, where are some of the places where you've seen that happen, and how does it look? How does it look? You can maybe describe how that kind of permaculture looks.
Okay, so I think there's the classic icon model of a refugee camp, or what we used to call favelas or slums. I'm now calling them crowded margins. Because these people are marginal to the city, and they're marginal, even if they're holding it together, they're marginal as rubbish because they're not fully incorporated into society and life and access to resources. The crowded margins, and that relates to our principal work on the margins. And because I didn't want to use words like slum, favela, all that stuff. So develop my own vocabulary.
What word do you use for, just while we're on that language, global south, global north, third world, first world, majority world, minority world? What's west, east, what do you use?
Well, I try to refer to countries and places by name. And when I'm referring to the rich and elite West, I call them the rich. The rich, they're the rich. So they're rich if they've got some money in the bank, and they're rich if they've got 3 meals a day, and they're rich if they've got secure accommodation. And in the future, they'll be rich if they've got a job. But anyway, I'm tending to do that. But there is a problem because some cities can contain both very easily, such as we realised with Singapore. Singapore's got its own slums of its migrant workers hidden away, and I found them once. I went fossicking in the back of Singapore and found these dreadful buildings with wide-in verandas and broken drug stuff, all behind the facade of Orchard Road or whatever it is. So every city has sort of got that as well. So the rich, I'm really talking about those with security options. Right? I think to have choices makes you rich. Extreme poverty, prisoners have no choices. That's a nice definition, I think of, but that's a working one. So what I've found, several things. It's partly how you set up the design work. So I find a local NGO, not international, ask them if they're interested, do quite a lot of preparation, put together what I know as a PDC budget. And I'll only teach a PDC because these people might never get another chance in their life to do a PDC. Now, if I don't do an intro here, they can all come back next week and do the full course. It's not. But to offer people the full design options, I think, is really important. Some people say they can't understand, but everyone, they do understand. It's how you teach. Anyway, and then I include some local people if possible. 2/3 of a class has to be refugees or internally displaced people. Then the NGO can send their people, then some locals. And by accident, I've hit upon a type of a mix that works. Because we put enough money in the budget, not just to teach the course, but to leave the NGO with some money, follow up for 6 months. Because everyone leaves the course enthusiastic. We're going to do this and could do that. And it's the same with refugees. They're not any different. But it's 6 months later, the unexpected person who's emerged, the person who's grabbed the opportunity, the group who's working with something you didn't ever think they would. First of all, they said, yes, we'd like to try. Secondly, no one knew what permaculture was. Advertising it was difficult. There wasn't time to do a taste and try. So people came who didn't quite know and trusted. We didn't take more than 30 people, except once where we couldn't resist. I had trainee teachers with me as well, whose first experience or second to work in camps. So it was a systems approach, refugees plus hosts plus local residents plus some trainee teachers. And it proved to be very, very good indeed. But the main thing was, I think, that at the end of the course, we had enough people coming forward who wanted to do, from the camps or settlements, who wanted a second course.
Right.
And the demand was enormous. And the host people would be saying to us, oh, thought you'd only have 5 or 6 left by now, or thought that they wouldn't last, or we're really surprised. And I attribute the success of that to permaculture content, which is so beautifully flexible that it's good for someone in a tent or a container who wants to make their container or tent warmer or cooler in summer. And they can get it maybe a bamboo blind or a blanket. They want to do something with grey water differently from the rich backyard. They know there's room for a shade tree. They can be innovative about the roof. They can maybe get some bamboo. All this opens the possibilities of where they are just as much as it does to somewhere in France, America, or New Zealand.
So is this something about the possibility of reclaiming some dignity, reclaiming some power over their life, seeing that by understanding this, it gives them an opportunity to transform the space or their life where they're in? Is it something to do with that, or is it just something more simpler than that? I don't know.
Well, a lot of people actually sit around all day, and for the men, they show a great deal of anger and despair because they've been used to showing their skills and abilities and working. I mean, these are people like us, and they arrive with all this possibility. They've been farmers and growers and workers and French professors, and depending on where they come from, huge range of things. And suddenly they're superfluous to need. It's putting people on the rubbish heap, really. And they are hurt and wounded, and there's no way to earn income because the camps are so big very often. So the food is often shocking or pretty dull. And so anything that you could just do here and now, but gives you your choice. If you want to play with grey water systems, or if you want to grow vegetables, or if you want to grow seedlings and distribute to others, you can choose where that little spark that says, I'd really like to do that, you can actually choose that if you want to. And so I think it's been successful because permaculture is pretty comprehensive. I think it's successful because, you can practice it anywhere, really. The landless poor are very difficult, wandering around cities, the homeless poor. But on the whole, there's an enormous number of people who find it relevant. Some say, well, when we go home, I'll be able to do better than I did before. Others say, do you think I could earn a living with this? And that is a topic I'm addressing now. So in the revision of Earth Users Guide, I've got a topic called work and livelihoods. Because if we hit the skids economically and take a big downturn, not only refugees and displaced people on the margins want work, everyone will want work. So I'm trying to address less employable work options for people without being clever and just say you could do this or you could do that. I can do that from the security of here, but in a camp it's not that easy. And there would have to be things put in place, such as more professional courses to bring people up to a commercial, applicable level, which we can't do in the PDC. But that's getting away. I think it's partly if you engage people in their learning. So you also get them to design for the camp or tent. You don't get them to design for some imaginary place or where I came from. Right here and now, what could you do? And they have to come back next morning and tell you. And then come back there. And they sit round at night, apparently, and discuss it in fairly crowded conditions with people. And that takes you off wondering what's happening in Yemen, what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Sudan. A little bit of freedom in your mind from being colonised by trauma and worry. So I don't know whether it gives them, I think it's not one thing. No. I think some people think, I just love to do it. Some people like to think, it's such a good thing to be doing this because I'm not thinking about home. Others would be interested in accumulating skills for moving on. We haven't done the work on that. A young woman called Suruti from India did her master's at an English university on the impact of natural environments for refugees. And she interviewed people who are doing the permaculture course, and she's written some really nice stuff in her master's about how people were responding differently and what they were doing. Having something to do is nice. I mean, COVID has given a lot of people who couldn't get out of that 80-story building and weren't allowed out the sense of what it might be like to be a refugee.
That was my next question, is how do you think our experience is in this period now, being in lockdown with the pandemic? I mean, things are starting to open up now, but how do you feel it's shifted our perception of the value, possibly, of permaculture, and maybe open up new potential for it in the rich countries, as well as maybe some bigger organisations might see more value in supporting it, rippling out more? Or is that not something that's important? Is it, because you did mention about the working with the local NGOs, and that's where that kind of sweet spot is that you've found in really connecting and have rippling out something that stays and lasts?
I think from the Australian, New Zealand point of view of COVID-19, because it's not the same in London or America, and countries where it's just starting to get first or second wave and is terrifying, actually. But in Australia, I think politically, it's made politicians listen to scientific and medical experts. Normally they wouldn't do that. It's all opinion and party platform. I think the second thing is realisation how dependent we are on other countries for imports and exports. And some were already saying we can't let some of these go offshore again. It's almost bioregionalism, meet our own needs and the things that are important, absolutely critical. So I think there's been a coming home of what we've been saying for a long, long time, is that we need to look to meeting our own needs on that basis, that we're not caught in absolute panic when things shut off or close down. The very, very difficult thing is whether they'll find a medication. If they don't, if they don't find a vaccine, and they may not because it mutates so fast, it might be like a flu vaccine you have to have every week, it may not be effective for all. And the third thing is, if they don't, our lives have changed so enormously, it's hard to really rewrite the permaculture as I'm doing it. So if I'm trying to talk about cities, we used to write about people, places and interaction and people being able to get fair trade shops and coffee shops and meet. Suddenly it's become quite different if you have to maintain nearly 2 meters distance between everyone everywhere. The city that we thought was lovely and rich and cultural and full of fabulous resources for people to grow and express themselves and be creative becomes something where people are sort of doing slalom around each other down the street to avoid each other and trying to work with what a design of a city should be, because I'm having to rethink so much permaculture. Is very hard. I think what they are going to have to do is shut down some of the traffic streets and have more outdoor eating, cubicles, under trees, bistro blinds, and maybe a lot more streets have to be narrowed and changed to allow the spillover of people that allows the density, getting closer to former densities, to be in the streets if you want a city. Someone's even saying people are going to leave the cities now.
That's my question.
They're not going to go back to offices. They're going to desert.
You think that we'll see another wave of that kind of back to the land movement, or, going to the edges of the city rather than, because we've had a recent wave of everyone coming in and the city's going up, and are we going to see that sort of coming back out again because of the fear of these waves? And, if it's not COVID-19, it might be COVID-20 or whatever it might be that's coming. Are we rethinking our society again? I mean, that's a very big question. It's kind of beyond permaculture, but, it does then influence how, like you're saying, how we think about permaculture and how we need to keep permaculture alive.
Well, what I think is we don't know. So therefore, getting ready, remember, preparedness beats reaction any day. scrambling to catch up and get things right. It's too expensive, too hard, too emotionally. And when I do disaster training as a whole short course, I find at the end of people's I feel terrific now. I know what I'm doing. I've got it done. I'm okay. I met someone in the co-op 2 meters away. She said, I did a course with you in 2001, and the one that made the biggest impression was disasters. I did it, and right through the bushfires, I've been fine, and I'm okay now. Mm-hmm. So I think if you want a secure, trusting population, permaculture almost becomes obligatory in terms of whatever the disaster, or more likely cascading disasters, multiple. It wouldn't just be flood followed by famine or disease. It's likely to be fire plus COVID plus economic breakdown, those three. And it seems to me that really forward-thinking planners and governments should be advising people now how to start preparing for conditions which may be 2 or 3 at the same time. And I can't think of anything other than permaculture. I'm not a permaculture believer in the sense that permaculture's got the answer to every question. But I've looked at organic gardening and biodynamics and everything, regenerative farming. The only thing that provides you with a coherent set of principles and ways to build for uncertainty, which is the only certainty, is permaculture. And because you can take it anywhere, in a way, people used to say everyone should learn this. I wouldn't be surprised if we hit a double disaster and the government scratching around said, well, actually, yes, everyone's going to have to learn it. Teach it in schools as a priority, teach it everywhere as a priority.
Well, it's interesting because, there's the farm household allowance. There's a number of people who are doing the course who are actually sponsored by the government to come and do this course as part of their farm household allowance because of the droughts. There's a young girl on another program because of mental health issues has been sponsored by government to come and do the course. So there is this recognition in pockets that permaculture actually does help to respond to so many different things. But how can you see it? I was going to ask you 2 questions, but the first one, I guess, kind of, well, there's many questions, but they're cascading into each other. Mm-hmm. So the first one was about, where was I going with that? So if permaculture is at this kind of mycelial level at the moment, and it's everywhere around the world pretty much, but it's not being heard or recognised by those government organisations that are making decisions, what would it take, do you think, to kind of help to meet these? Or is there another way of thinking about this altogether?
No, I think there's possibly a way through, and I hadn't thought this before, but I've been in touch with Nurani. We've been back here in Malaysia at a university there, and she is the SDGs officer for the university. It's a big, amazing university. And she is dynamic and extraordinary, and she is putting the SDGs through the whole university. So everything they do is held up to the litmus paper of an SDG. However, when you sit down and compare the 17 SDGs with permaculture principles give you a better overall guide. And so she was the one who got Kat Lavis and Greta Carroll myself to go there and teach. And since then, she's known how to apply the SDGs very, very strongly. And I'm not talking about techniques of making compost. It's an approach to reaching more sustainable, greener environments. We're talking about waste and water and local food and things than the SDGs give you. But as a result, when I'm talking about permaculture principles, I also, in the new book, talk about UN. Is it UN? No, it's just the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, together with the principles, because in many cases they have got some nice extensions to those SDGs. So I see as if we could get married.
Yes.
permaculture and the SDGs would have a wonderful future and relationship because they provide the balance and carry on that neither one quite does enough. Now, SDGs are being picked up by companies, by governments, by universities. They have SDG offices. Now, when they put that together with permaculture, they're nearly unstoppable.
Yeah.
So the permaculture's gone right through this university now, in the grounds and in a buying policy. We will buy organic, we'll buy green, we'll produce this, we'll buy local. It's sort of the SDGs, they're just, they're love and marriage, they're trees and water.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that. These little boxes here are my... I went and did some training with the Gaia education on SDGs, multiplying the SDGs. And so we have kits of these cards, and there's a whole lot of really interactive processes that we use with that. But why I mentioned it was because May East, who is one of the actual authors of the SDGs, is leading Gaia education. And we were talking with her, and she was saying that, the SDGs are kind of the framework that connects, but permaculture is the way to make them all happen. And she said that last year to me, and it just hit home. And I'm glad you reminded me, because it's, there's so much going on in our lives, to keep those. That is really the avenue, isn't it? Because SDGs have gone right through from the very top, right through to African villages. People know these and understand them and are talking about them. So that marriage, I think, is absolutely essential. I'm kind of like getting all tingles thinking about the potential that we actually do by communicating that.
I don't know how to do it, but I know that when they're there, it's just unstoppable. So, I think they do talk about energy, but then permaculture will say catch and store, and in your class, whether it's a temperate area or a desert or hot, wet rainforest, you can just say to people, what's the best way for you to catch and store energy? They'll give you their own processes and ways of doing it. And some will be glass and some will be trees and some will be stone. They can do all that once you say, translate that SDG into catch and store.
Yep.
Yeah. At that point, they're able to do it. So permaculture, create no waste. Very good. How can you do that? What are the ways? And all you need to do is fill in with anything new or special that works for people, I think. I think I wish we could get it together. Maybe Narani's work's exceptional. It'd be interesting if she was able to write her paper and feed back to UN, because we want people who are doing it to be able to say, not just us saying we think you should, unless we've actually put them together.
Well, May East and I were planning on writing a paper together about SDGs and permaculture, but it sounds like we need to have a bit bigger team and draw in. Is it Narani, did you say?
Narani Abu Bakir, and she's Malaysian, and I can follow up later.
That would be wonderful.
But she may be with us on Tuesday night if she can. She's pretty busy, she's dynamic, but quite wonderful. So she's got refugees employed in the permaculture and the SDGs. She chose those who had immense gifts, young, 16, 17, who just pushy-eyed, we can do this, let's go.
Great.
So refugees got jobs from it. So not everyone, but enough.
Yeah.
And they are now writing materials and teaching in the languages of the Chin and forget which other groups, language groups that have been pushed out of Myanmar to the east. So
fantastic.
Rohingya went to the west, and these other groups are in the east. Anyway, but I think actually COVID is really, really challenging. And the other thing that's challenging, if you're wanting to write permaculture again or develop materials, that the averages that we were using in terms of climate and wind and predictability, the only thing that probably hasn't changed is day length. But, evaporation and pressure and reliability of winds, reliability of water, whether you get torrential downpours, all this is changing so fast. I think we have to pick up that word opportunistic And we have to train people to be much, much better observers so they can be opportunistic about their own environment. They have to watch the sky, not the Weather Bureau, and look and see if they're going to get the rain, and have to have the seedlings ready or the trees ready or materials or whatever they need to do. But opportunism about implementing permaculture practices has to be one of the perhaps newer ideas that we need against global warming and climate disruption, because I've been looking at some figures and I thought, gosh, 10 years ago, I would have built water harvesting on those figures in Western Australia. Today, the rainfall is half over the last 10, 15 years. So if I got the wrong figures, and will they change again in the future, and to what? So
I think that really keeping that clear in mind too, that it's not permaculture, your design is not a fixed thing either, is it? You don't just design once. It's that constant observation and interaction and refinement, and it's sort of that iterative process that you are, as a designer, it's not designing a thing or a map, it's designing a constant approach to being in relationship with the land and the community and the whole system. And I think that's where it really kind of sits me, is it helps us to become more in relationship and to set on a path of enriching those consistently. And that's kind of where I feel like, because it is in a way, when you enter into the world of permaculture thinking, it flips how you see yourself in relation to others and to the land and even to yourself. And once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. I think this kind of
we're no longer people who design landscapes and put them in. We're people who observe and respond with our knowledge of how to design. So therefore, something might have to come out or something else has to go. And we have to be, what's that terrible word? It's going to be a real word like incredible. I think agile, flexible enough, sure enough of our observation decisions to be able to make those changes in time, not when it's too late.
So what would you say to young people who are in the world now thinking, gosh, what's happening with my future? What's happening with the future of the world? What would you recommend for them how to, maybe getting involved in permaculture, but how would they enter into this space, do you think?
I'd say never accept a limited future. So instead of saying, I can't do that and I can't do that, say there's another way to do it. I haven't thought of it yet. There's a way around it. So it's really about seeing possibilities. So just don't accept a limited future. Even if we end up with a whole series of cascading disasters, our future is actually broader in what we can do and apply it than it was when it's all predictable. Which is actually more constrained. It's like having a regular climate, which provides you with a narrow palette compared with uncertainty, which gives you a wider palette of planting and species, all responsive. I would say get ready for changing futures, be flexible, equip yourself with the sorts of information that's, pretty reliable and good. You probably can't go past permaculture. And throw yourself into the future. It's going to have lots of challenges and lots of interests. Now, there's two sorts of people who feel disappointed, those who feel that they can't have what their parents had. That's my generation's children and grandchildren, and I feel bad about that. I'm not sure what you do, but, they will be things for them to do. Things to do never stop, and being part of a solution never stops either. Small or big, it's not about that. But the other thing to remember is once you engage in something, you're going to feel better. You're going to probably develop a passion. Others are going to watch you, whether you're out there teaching or whether you're just doing it somewhere and someone watches. And what are you doing? And can I help? And what is that? And I think once you know that you're on a road, even if you don't know exactly where, so some people will be on the road maybe to natural building, or some to ethical money, and some might be to reshaping or restoring landscapes. And for a little while, you try different dead ends, but you end up on the one that you really seems to you don't want to do anything else with your life. You know, we're not Mozarts. We're not born with a symphony in our heads. We're born finding our way. But once we're on that road, we'll find our way. If it's to do with the earth or it's to do with ethical money or whatever, those things, you will find your way. You just keep trying different things.
And I think also be, having the courage to also to reach out and ask people who've been doing it for a while. Sometimes we sort of have this generational rift between, I have to wait to be asked or taught, but actually reaching out. I know that has been something that has been absolutely critical to me, to my development, is following, like you were saying, following my heart, following the passion, following where I feel like the work needs to be done and being drawn to that, and approaching the people that I know who've been doing it for a while, and just, knowing that I never know everything and I never will know everything, and that I'm always a beginner and I'm always a learner, and it's by that learning together that we can actually keep, keeping it relevant, keeping it alive.
It's helpful to learn from others who are ahead of you, but it's also good to be having those collegiate conversations regardless of age and time. So there was a wonderful someone from United Arab Emirates yesterday, or the UAE or something, and someone from India on a Skype together. And I realised we're having the most rich, wonderful conversation on the application of permaculture about where they live. Now, because they had the real knowledge of where they live and they belonged, they were able to illuminate and challenge. I had to think whether what I was saying was true and applicable. So it was very rigorous to test whether you're just raving on permaculture is great and you should just do swales sort of answer, or whether you have to absolutely think about the integrity of your words and applications. It's a sort of conversation you come away from feeling terribly enriched. And look, they were very young, from my point of view, and wonderful thinkers and questioners and doers. So I don't know, it's generational. It's something to do with the conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think too, in those last two things that you said, it's also about going off script. Go off script with permaculture, that, you keep the essence, but it's not about just repeating the same things over and over. And it's like you talk about in a bigger scale, just in the point before, was that actually now culturally, we're off script. COVID has pushed us off this kind of script that we had, and that we're now trying to redefine what that is. And we can't just keep rolling out the same things that we always have, because we're seeing the cracks in the system. We're seeing where those scripts are no longer serving us. And it's interesting.
Yeah. Coming back to COVID, I think if you've got any money, if you've got any resources, if you've got any choices, prepare now your home and living space to the best you possibly can, thinking the worst may happen, but it may not. Getting prepared now will save you money, save you resources, save you distress, everything. So whether it's a matter of simply putting in a whole mass of potatoes or getting, a banana growing outside your tent door, do it now. Think a bit and do it as soon as you can, because it's this uncertainty again. The better you prepare now, the easier it's going to be for you. And it also frees you up to work with others if you want to, and to model something for them. In some ways, there were people writing about a pandemic as early as 2012, and no one listened to them. And I think we're not saying you're going to be unhappy and destroyed. We're going to say life changes. Let's get ready for the change now by getting your own needs sorted as well as you can before you sort of get hit with whatever's coming. And that really means quite good permaculture principles, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's big changes afoot, and I think, the more that we those of us, I suppose, who are able to share it, to be able to keep on rippling it out. But I guess the thing that's challenging right now is that, for example, the work that you've been doing in the world, directly face to face with groups of 30 here, groups of 30 here, groups of 30 here, and that rippling out, that's changed. So I wonder how the kind of work that you're doing will be able to continue in the near future without being able to be there. How can you do what you do and not be there?
I don't think I'll be doing the same thing. I think it'll change. So where I was starting PDCs to make sure a local NGO and some people knew about them, in addition to refugees, the next step that we weren't able to do was to train refugees to be PDC teachers. And by train them, I mean give them the skills so they didn't have to spend 10 years learning it the hard way themselves. It might be fun and interesting, but, it shortcuts that learning, which is really what about courses do for us, isn't it? We don't have
what are some of the easiest, well, not easiest shortcuts, what do you think are some of the most important shortcuts that we can take as many people as possible on this journey to be permaculture teachers everywhere around the world?
Well, I'm thinking at the moment, if we're in touch with any NGOs, let's train those NGOs to be permaculture teachers. They speak the local languages. They've probably got English, so you might be able to work directly. Or if you've got another language, maybe you've got French or Arabic or something, then you can use that. And I think we've nearly got enough methods now to teach a course well online. So people would have to go home that evening after a course and teach someone something tomorrow morning before they come back to the online course. And they'd have to choose a topic and say why they chose it. And they'd have to add their materials to it and say why it was valuable. I think it would be a little bit rough at first, but I think we'd probably be able to emerge, and that teaching teachers becomes important. But at the same token, there are going to be huge food shortages. So somehow we need to be talking to people who have got entry into camps to say, come on, get people growing seed, not only their own food. We must have the seed growers for that place and situation. And let's get you some money to pay those farmers to grow seed that can have a small business, distribute seed or seedlings, and maybe some materials sometimes. I'm not sure, but I'm thinking, how can we equip the people who are there? We mightn't be on a plane to those places, some of them for years. You might be able to go to New Zealand next week, but you won't be going back to Bangladesh, or possibly India, or Iran or Iraq, all those places. So, how can we work with the people with whom we've made contact with? And very often we've been working with them in English. And I'm sorry, it's imperial language, but it is now the universal. And we've got relationship. So what we've been talking about are ways of teaching and offering them better teaching methods, from chalk and talk or sage on the stage to more interactive. And there's some fabulous stuff coming up, but it's not a matter of just referring them to a video clip or a Vimeo, it's a matter of getting them at the other side of the screen doing something, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Go and do something. Go and name all the plants you can see in the next 20-metre circle from your place. Write them down and come back in 5 minutes. That sort of thing that you do in a class.
Yeah, great.
And help. But if people are not online, then we've got a couple of wonderful people who are working on illustrations. And Ruth Harvey, who was in Cox's Bazaar, who said to me the other day, all I want to do is posters that tell a story, right? That's all I want to do. And they wouldn't have language. They would just be the food web, or they would be Succession, or they would be lovely artists. She can't wait. She's setting up a space to do that for this sort of situation. And I think that I mentioned it to James, that we need to fund someone to look at the world's best resources in languages, in permaculture, including Vimeos and everything, nothing more than 5 minutes probably, and get a research person who knows permaculture in different cultures, possibly have a couple of advisory committees, 2 or 3 people who say, look, that won't happen because of that, or I can see that there's a pig in that one, or there's a cow in that one, or there's a cat in that one, and that sort of thing, and be able to help people with cultural context, or it's too fast or something, and then we also feed those through to hosts to use in different ways. So different, I haven't thought it through, but I have tried looking at my materials, as you know, and sending them to you. I'll try again. And but what I have found, that what I've mainly got is from course materials, PDCs, but I haven't got it. They're only word lists, really, in Arabic and in Rohingya and in these languages, Dari and Farsi. And what we need is someone to do a search. 6 or 8 months, we fund them. They're terrific. They love it. They're finding the right stuff. And to do that, first we'd probably have to have an agreed list of things you must teach for people to be. They must know about water. They must know about soil, whether it's a pot or whether it's on their roof or whether it's in their garden. They must know about water capture and cleaning and storage. They must know about trees and permanence. They must know. So, we could easily get a must-know list, which is different from should and ought to know or could know, and then someone could fit the research to those musts. And then we could draw on them. So there might be something in French and something here and something that each of us who's working in this area or other organisations could go through. Almost online encyclopedia, but not too big. You don't want everything listed. It has to be selective.
Yeah.
It has to have people from different nationalities. It has to have certain types of clothes. It has to, those things as well. What's your response to that?
Well, it's a huge project, what you've just articulated, I think, but it can start really simply. Like also, as you said, just with that must know. And it feels like if there's a possibility to have just that ever so simple skeleton of the system, then each time it goes to a different place. I'm thinking, for example, of the group that I'm working with at the moment in the refugee camp in Uganda. So with the Perma-Youth group, that by providing some kind of overall structure of must know, and then through conversation, that we can inhabit that skeleton with the key things that they need to know there, and then that kind of can be then spread out somewhere else, and it can get re-inhabited. So it still feels a little bit slow and incremental, but I think that generative approach is where it's going to become locally relevant. So just the absolute structure, because if we start to create too much, well, then I sort of sometimes feel like if a group, another group started to ask for it, and I gave them this great big compendium of information, they'll just go, I don't even know where to start with that. So it's a very clear step by step, and that goes against a lot of what I sort of think about too. It needs to be this, rather than being sort of just prescriptive of what people need to do. But I think through the decades of focusing on this, there is the capacity to go, okay, well, this is the essence, this is what we need to do, and then wrapped around that, we can make local sense of that. And that's going to change as well. And that will continue to change as well. Yeah.
I start my permaculture teacher training with all the students in groups together that they're going to stay in, drawing a picture of their permaculture graduate coming out of their course and what do they know. So they end up with a certain number of competencies that they've listed right at the beginning, and then we start talking about how to teach them. There's different topics, different methods, different styles, and teacher behaviour and everything. But the thing is, they have in their minds that a graduate should have these things to be reasonably competent in. And overall, I would say they need to look at a landscape, understand where it is in terms of damage and repair, and be able to restore, regenerate, renew, whatever the word is, to make it more abundant, hold water, build soils, biodiversity. That would be for me, the overall thing, and then how to get there would be that person leaving your course. Now, obviously, they don't all leave the course like that, and I only use the drawings as a means for them to concrete what they know and what they'd like to do and a feeling of it, not as an end in themselves to be able to design. It's much more about, that's there and that's not what I thought, and I'll go back and look and check, and it's making it real, but it's not in itself an absolute thing. So if I were working with people who want to be teachers, I wouldn't ask them to do 12 designs. I'd ask them to go and apprentice themselves to someone and go and work with 3 or 4 courses and then come back and say what you learned, and then I'd learned something. Much more focused to what the outcomes are. Anyway.
All right, I think we probably need to wrap up because both of us need to be on another meeting very soon. We need a cup of tea between this. But just for the very last thing, I know you've probably been asked this a million times, but how would you define permaculture?
Okay. What I think is that permaculture is definitely a design system, but it's an analytic and a design system. So when you're observing, you're noting that tree's blocking the sun, and you're noticing that has got a very heavy crop, and you're noticing the slope. So a lot of noticing going on. So I see it. Oh, look, I have thought of some good definitions at times, but I've forgotten the one I use. It's not an approach either, because you actually have a number of things you've learnt in permaculture you bring to be able to be part of restoration of earth. So I guess it's to do with working with the social and the prosperity and the environment to achieve positive outcomes through a series of skills and knowledge that you build for the rest of your life. That's a bit vague. I used to say it's applied science. I still think it is. But I've grown away from that. I find it, because it's so big, to start a course and someone says, what's permaculture? I don't do that. I put a circle on the board, write permaculture. Everyone has to get a pen and say what they think it is, and then I circle the things that it is. I ask them to link them, and I say that's also our syllabus for the course. So they'll say a garden, water, soil, or something. So I don't do, and then I say, now you write your definition from that, and then read it out, and everyone's slightly different. So I don't have anything. I have prepared them for big talks and things with businesses or people or unis or something. But at the moment, I really like people understanding the scope of it more.
I think that's a really important thing that, I love actually that you've got no pre-prepared script snap to come out because the thing is that it does, again, it's the definition or the description of it is always different depending on where you are, who you're working with, what the landscape is. If I've tried to pull out the sort of an essential definition to describe, I say something very simple, like it's designed for one planet living, something like that. But then you can take off in any different angle. Like if I have to say like a 3-second description of it, that, it is about, and then you can go into the regeneration and that, it's about social justice, and you can describe it in so many different ways from that. So that's kind of the simplest essence that I've been able to
I think it's so important it can be applied globally. I think that's critical. I think that it comes from ethics and principles, absolutely fundamental to understanding, and that it equips people to be part of things like reversing global warming and land destruction.
Sorry to throw that one in at you at the end. But
it's cup of tea time, Morag.
It is cup of tea time, right. Thank you so much for spending this time and exploring all of these, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Rosemary.
lovely to have the conversation. Well, these are conversations, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, permaculture conversations. Lovely. Thanks, Morag. It's great to meet you. Enjoyed it thoroughly. Bye.
So thanks for tuning in to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to have your company. I invite you to subscribe and receive notification of each new weekly episode with more wonderful stories, ideas, inspiration, and common sense for living and working regeneratively. And call positive permaculture thinking and design into action in this changing world. I'm including a transcript below and a link also to my 4-part permaculture series, really looking at what is permaculture and how to make it your livelihood too. So join me again in the next episode where we talk with another fascinating guest. I look forward to seeing you there.